Hello, this is Jerry with What's Broke Today. That for our victim today is a 2010 Ford Edge. And what we've got here is one that the AC is not working on it properly, that the compressor never kicks on and runs. And of course, to start out, I put my gauges on it to make sure we had refrigerant in it. And of course, I'm up at about 80 pounds, so that should be enough to overcome the low pressure sensor and kick on the compressor. So first thing I did was actually come over here to the fuse box, and I looked in the owner's manual and figured out that fuse 35 was the AC compressor, and then relay 37 was actually our compressor relay. Did using my test light, checked, made sure I had power through the fuse, and then unplugged the fuse and actually did a visual look, and even put a different fuse in it, and then pulled the relay out and probed it and made sure that I was getting power to the relay, and that come out good. So I come over here and I thought, well, check the compressor and make sure it was plugged in, but it's way down there and hard to get to. And I actually crawled underneath, unplugged it, and used my voltmeter and did a voltage test, and I had no volts going down to the compressor. So went back over to the relay, and I actually got my wiring diagram out so I could make sure where I needed to check, and I've not got no signal coming from the inside out to even activate the relay. So after I got done with all that, I actually came inside and just took things apart just to look and see and make sure I didn't have any wires come loose, and get all prepped and ready for diagnosis. And when I started out with my diagnosis, I actually printed off my wiring diagram and was checking power outs and power ins, and that all my power supply and grounds were good going into the AC unit. And so next step was trying to figure out what could be keeping it from coming on, and this is a unit that has auto air conditioning. So I actually got my engine scan tool out, scanned, and according to the scanner and live data, the air conditioner should have been on. And I went back to a car I'd worked on previously that had a bad evaporator temperature sensor. So I did my YouTube searches, and of course everything I found said your Ford Edge does not have one. But when I go to my wiring diagram, here we have our evaporator temperature sensor, which basically it looks at the temperature of the evaporator, and if it gets too cold where it could actually ice up from the condensation, it'll kick the compressor out so that it doesn't run for a few seconds or maybe a minute till the temperature rises, and then it'll kick the compressor back on. So, and of course we got on this Edge, it's a green wire with a black stripe comes off the sensor, goes back, and then at the junction, which I'll show you in a little bit, actually changes colors and goes to a violet wire with a brown stripe going into the AC control unit. And then our black wire is a common, it's just ground. It's a neutral that comes off the module, and it goes to quite a few things: evaporator sensor, ambient sensor on the inside, ambient sensor on the outside. And since these appear to be working, I figured the ground's probably good. So I went into the car, and I had to, I was trying to I was actually going to try and run the test up here at the wires going into the back of the control unit, and of course my eyesight's not the best, and trying to figure out which purple wire was actually a brown stripe was a pain. So I just went ahead and because I'd looked up where the junctions were, and found we had a connector that was hidden behind the glove box. So after pulling the glove box out, I find my green wire with a black stripe in position 8 where it's supposed to be, and of course the black wire's in position 1, and then right here's where it changes color, because we're green with black going in and then purple with violet coming out. So what I ended up doing was just unplugging that connector, and I got it pulled out here where I could get to it, and took my multimeter, went inside the connector and ohmed across pin 1 to pin 8, to see what our ohms reading was, and I had an open circuit. So of course that's, very well I got a bad sensor. So I went to looking on the auto parts store websites and on the Ford parts lookup online, and I could not find that sensor separately. And of course that sensor is mounted inside of the evaporator case, and you'd have to pull the whole dash, console, dash, and a lot of stuff apart just to get in there to look at that sensor. I mean, we're probably talking a 10-hour job doing it that way, and then hope you get it all back together and don't forget to plug something in, or have a squeaker new rattle that you didn't have before. So when I ended up going up to my local Ford dealer and asking him if I could get that sensor, and it's probably, I don't know if this may not be a common problem, but I've seen that sensor fail in other vehicles, so I figure this isn't the only one that sensor failed. But he looked it up and said they don't sell that sensor separately. You've got to buy the whole evaporator case assembly. And I asked him, well, what does that cost? He says, well, if I could get it, it was a little over like $1,061, I think, to get that whole case assembly. But it's an obsolete part at Ford, which, having a part like that can fail and not selling it separate, because it actually looks like inside that box, when you look at the harness layout, it plugs in inside the box. So what I ended up doing was go online and trying to find another Ford vehicle that had one of those sensors. And what I came up with was, for this sensor, which goes in a 2010 Ford F-250 truck for the air conditioner, and assuming, being across the Ford lines, that the ohm rating as a temperature on this sensor changes should be relatively close to the same. And so I ordered this, and I'm getting ready to I'm actually going to wire this in and put a few things back together, and then I'll come back with the video and let you know if the sensor actually got our compressor running or not. So yep, I'll be back with you shortly. Oh, and here's the part number for that sensor, just in case you need to order one, if my fix actually works. So I'll be back. Alright, well, I got my sensor wired in just like it needed to be, and then I just tucked it up here kind of behind that for now. I'm probably going to zip tie it somewhere, because I don't want to take a chance of it getting in that linkage. But the real update is I got that put in, turned the AC on, and of course the compressor still didn't kick on. So I restarted all my testing, and the new thing I had when I come back for testing was when I pulled the relay and checked power supplies to the relay, and even tried switching the relay just to make sure I didn't miss something. And I did finally have both powers and the ground going in, but also now I could actually take the relay and just, pull it up and just push it down, and I could finally hear it click. So I just left it pulled up slightly, pushed it in far enough to hear it click, and then took my test light, and that rear terminal back here is the one that is the output going to the compressor, and I finally had power there. So then I came back over and unplugged my compressor again, and then of course I can pull the wire up, and the purple wire with the white stripe going in here is the power. So after putting in my sensor, now I have power and ground going to the compressor, and it didn't turn, so it was a pain, but I got up in there and ohmed out the compressor clutch, and of course it's open. So I'm going to order an AC compressor and get that put on, and that should have us going. Alright, we're back here at the Ford Edge that I've already switched the AC compressor, but just little tips if you're doing one yourself is, compressor's hid way down on the bottom, and you can see it from the bottom, but you can't get to everything real well. So I started out, I drained the coolant, which like on the edge, it's the drains on the driver's side at the bottom of the radiator, and I drained it down below it was all out of the bottle, so it was lower than the upper hose, because I actually unhooked the upper hose, took the air box out, and then took the two bolts out of the fan, and then pulled the fan up out of there. And then that way I could get down, reach down and get the lines loose, deal with the wire, and also get the top bolt. It was a lot easier. And then underneath, the one bolt where this, this bracket here goes to I think it's the low pressure line. But you got to take the nut off and then unscrew the stud out of there, and you just unscrew it and just leave it loose in the compressor, and then you can take your final bolt out, which is here on the back end of the compressor up here, and they're all 13 millimeter headed bolts. And then once you get them loose, just pop off the lines, and then you can take this last bolt out, and it sets on some dowels, so you kind of wiggle it and pop it free. Then you can just raise it up, kind of twist it, and it'll just fall right out through the bottom. Then when you're going back in, just make sure you always put this through the new compressor, and I get it up there and up on the pins, and then I can start the one bolt I can reach from the bottom and get it screwed in most of the way. And then I start this bolt, and actually, on the tip of it is a hex shape. I don't have a wrench that small, so I just use a small pair of vice grips and got it unscrewing. And once that got up where I couldn't get this slid over, I went ahead and took off that line, and then got it slid off the stud, backed it out the rest of the way till it was loose, and I ended up, once I got past where the nut screws in, I actually was running the vice grips on the bolt itself, which wasn't as bad as it looked like it'd be. And then reverse putting it back together, and I went up top and put the final compressor bolt in, and then hooked up both lines, and then got my gauges back on it. And anytime the system don't have Freon in it, make sure you always vacuum it out. That I let this run for about 40 minutes today because it's so humid here. And now I just shut it off and I just letting the gauges hold, and I'm gonna put some of it back together and then just make sure, you know, it's like a pre-check for leaks, because if the vacuum falls off, then you know there's something not sealing. But you know, the only thing I really messed with was the lines going onto the compressor. So, and I did put new O-rings on, so should not have any trouble there. Then I'm gonna go ahead and start putting some more stuff back together, and I'll let you know when I get her done. All right, well, on a recap on our Ford Edge, all back together. Like I say, I was cooling 35 degrees running down the road. That was on max AC. And of course, it's an auto air unit, so you turn the temperature down to 60 and it turns the fan all the way up, and then puts the recirculate door, closes it so you're getting cabin air to cool down. After I drove a little bit, I went ahead and turned the temperature back up to 67, and I was getting vent temperatures around 42, 43, so that wasn't bad. But yeah, I mean, new compressor. Then also put that sensor in on the inside. That probably the biggest thing about that, what I did with the sensor, is it's not inside the evaporator box now on the evaporator core. We do run the risk in certain conditions where it could, you know, the evaporator could freeze. But you'll probably know it, because as soon as that thing starts freezing up, you lose airflow out the vents. So weather like we're having today, and like, well, that was yesterday when I was out doing my test drive, you know, we're fairly high humidity, and it was 85 degrees when I got back. So you figure I had roughly I was getting a good 50-degree drop, and when we was doing air from the outside, I was still getting a good 40 degrees of temperature drop, and it was comfortable inside the car. Just, you have to be aware that, you know, if you ever do that, that you do run the risk of that evaporator freezing up when the condensation collects on it. That we'll just see how this does, because since you can't get that part new or even buy the sensor separate, and Ford couldn't even get me an evaporator box, you know, which the part was over $1,000, was what it showed for a price, even though they couldn't get it. You know, probably the only other thing that I was doing a little bit of research and found that, you know, the Ford Edge and a Mazda CX-9, you know, share a lot of the same stuff. So like the evaporator and the heater core in a CX-9 of the same year range is the same part number. Mazda does sell that sensor separate. I just don't know if it's the same sensor that's in the Ford, but I have to assume it probably is. You know, the only drawback to that is you've got to remove the entire dash and pull out the heater box and disassemble it to have access to the sensor and the evaporator core. So just a matter of whether you want to spend another 10 or 12 hours. And like say, if you've never taken a dash out of a car, I don't know that I recommend it, because if you don't get all the screws in and get everything back together right, you're going to have squeaks and rattles. And if you don't get something plugged in right, things aren't going to work good. So need to, you know, think carefully before you get into a project you may not be suited to do. But yeah, that wraps up our Ford Edge. Thanks for watching. You know, if you like my video, give me a thumbs up, and for the like, feel free to share, and please subscribe, and I will see you again soon. Thank you.